Rob Pegoraro. I'm a technology journalist, which means I'm trying to find ways to ensure that AI does not take my job. So maybe this panel is going to enlighten us. Don't get me depressed already. So I thought I'd start. I'm a DC-based tech journalist, been around since AI wasn't even a buzzword. I've seen a few things come and go, didn't always pan out as predicted. So I thought I would start. Introduce yourselves in a sentence. Tell me what brought you to this field.
I've been in AI for about 40 years. This is my third AI hype cycle. I pushed for machine learning approaches in the first place for natural language understanding and pioneered stuff like Google Translate.
Hi, my name is Ann Ahola Ward. I'm CEO of CircleClick, author of the SEO Battlefield, published by O'Reilly.
Good publisher.
And my fan section is right there. I'm an SEO by trade, so I'm no stranger to AI because SEOs have been friends with AI for a very long time by way of our tools and other things, but I won't go into that. And this is John.
And I'm Ant's friend. No.
Good answer.
Woo! My name is John. I'm a serial SaaS entrepreneur. My first startup was a call center software company called Five9, which today is a NASDAQ listed and traded company. My second one was in healthcare. It was called DoctorBase. It was a way for patients to message their doctors securely. And we grew that to 18,000 American doctors, 9 million American patients. We wanted to expand it internationally, but we were told Canadians are dangerous. Can't have Canadian doctors on the platform.
But they're nice.
Dangerous, uneducated. So we sold it to a company called Kareo, a large digital healthcare company in Southern California. And now I run a startup called JetBridge. We're a marketplace for software engineers. And I guess my relation to AI is in the past, I've probably been guilty of describing our small shell script as AI on a landing page. But now we are actually using generative AI to help our recruiters write emails to candidates.
So let's start with that. When is the last time you were fooled or not fooled by AI text and thought, a human wrote this? And what tipped you off?
Well, first of all, how do you know if you've been fooled? Because you've been fooled, right? So I reject that notion out of the gate. I would say, as an SEO, chum has been a problem that we've dealt with for a long time. Early days of SEO, it was about generating as much content as you could. And so I can spot it from a second away. I also have tools that can spot it. I think where it's been the most prolific has been in reviews, because some of them are so obviously fake and repetitive in their phrasing. So I think early days it was really easy. Now I think it's harder, but if it can fool me, I'm actually fine with it.
I mean, honestly, humans fool me all the time into thinking that what they're writing is AI generated.
There are a lot of humans on Twitter who fail the Turing test every day.
God.
That's right. That is right.
John?
So one of the things that probably most candidates, especially software engineers who are inundated by in-mails and emails from recruiters, is that recruiters just spam software engineers and technical people like you. The big joke is I'm a J2EE developer, and I've always been for the last 25 years, and I get constant job offers for React positions or Python positions. This isn't a great answer if you're a recruiter. They don't look like recruiters. But mostly what we've seen our team of recruiters do is do very repetitive tasks. And so the emails they write are incredibly generic. So what we've used generative AI for is to read a job description, job vacancy, scan that candidate's LinkedIn profile, and then it'll write a message that says, like, hey, Ann, based on your React project at Rappi, we would love to see if you're a fit for Invite, which has a front-end developer position available for. So, to answer your question, I know it's generated by AI at my work because it's highly customized. and recruiters speak in genericisms, right?
I was impressed by your profile.
I was impressed by your profile, right? And here's the link to the job. But it's amazing how generative AI now, just from having two sets of data, one's a job vacancy and the other is a LinkedIn profile, can tailor outbound recruiter spam, you know? It's amazing.
See, actually, you're making me think that the job seekers should use AI to have their resumes customized for the job description. So let's take off on that. What are the right tasks for this, where we should be relying on this, not just because we're trying to save money and get rid of somebody's job? What is AI going to be better at than a human? Where should we want to have it do the work?
I think AI is basically great for scale at this stage. But I also think that a lot of the things that we're talking about, you know, and ways to like detect if something was AI generated, either by a human or by an AI, is sort of a very short-term question. That's going to disappear really quickly because, you know, the things that people look at now to tell was this AI generated are so easily modified. By next year, those tricks aren't going to work. And in fact, you know, sort of the cat and mouse game that we're looking at right now, where there's generative AIs and then you have tools increasingly that are looking for ways to catch them. And then the generative AIs doing a leapfrog over that. That's just a manual version of the adversary, you know, GANs, right? And we know that GANs are going to improve very rapidly because you're constantly iterating on Fullian. And so, like, I think the question of what do we use generative AIs for, is rapidly, like, it's such an early 2023 question. By next year, it's going to be sort of like all of these things will be undetectably for many of these mundane tasks, right? And so, like, you want to use the generative AI for anything that is fairly mundane, fairly rote, and not worry about whether or not it's detectable. The question of whether it's a good use of it, I think it boils down to whether you're finding a use case for it that makes sense business-wise. And then the other half of the conversation has been, oh, well, people are cheating using generative AI, which to me, you know, as a longtime professor, is kind of a red herring. Like, if your way of assessing a student's skill is based on whether they can produce writing the same as a generative AI, you're not assessing their understanding correctly, right? And so my answer to your question is use it for whatever you can that's mundane. If it's something that's beyond the level of creativity that is possible this year, then wait till next year, because that's also shooting up leaps and bounds.
Interesting. AI has been a part of my life for a long time, from Google Select, trying to game that to understand what Google thought was a category group as an SEO. But I think where I'm the most personally excited about the applications of AI would be medical. Specifically, I am enamored with the Sepsis Watch study by Duke University, where they were using machine learning to identify the most common cause of death in hospitals, which is sepsis. And so they were finding that machine learning was able to detect signs before a nurse or a doctor could spot it, and overloaded medical staff, right? So I believe that technology can and should make your life better. So I don't see it as something that I'm scared of. I see it as something that will become a superpower. I've harnessed it in my work. Certainly I'm spending less now on copywriters, but it's never going to replace humans, I think, fully. I just think it's going to become something that will be quite dynamic and interesting for us and enable us. I also would like it to complete my text while I'm driving, to actually tell my husband what I'm doing. If I could just start the thought, that would get better, I'd be happy with that too.
You know, in our world, recruiting is one of the, remaining white-collar professions where you can make high six-figure salaries. But if you look at an 8-hour day of a recruiter, 85 to 95% of a recruiter's time isn't spent talking to candidates. It's spent sifting through LinkedIn profiles, composing an email, trying to get them to respond. And about 5 to 10% of your time is actually on Zoom interfacing with a candidate, right? We are looking at, within the next 18 months, most of that 80 to 85% of analyzing a profile and sending a message being fully automated and actually done slightly better by AI, right? And so my fear is what's going to happen to the profession of recruiting. I mean, it's something a lot of people make a really good living on. And if that industry is going to be compressed down where sourcers, people that just look at LinkedIn profiles, that's gone. Your senior recruiter that had 2 years of training in how to read a profile and send an email, that's gone. I mean, we eliminated that like 2 weeks ago, right? Our recruiters don't write emails anymore, they just edit them. Then really the art of recruiting will be the art of running a great interview, because that's something AI is not going to do, right? But again, that may mean that 65 to 70% of the world of recruiting and those professions and jobs goes away.
So what you're saying is at least my panel moderation work looks pretty economically sound for the foreseeable future.
I mean,
More or
to
less.
be fair, every use, like CNET is the best example of what happens when you unleash AI as a means to replace journalists. Horrible consequences. It's going to be litigated for years, the aftermath of that. I think you're fine.
There's actually a local news site near where I live where the publisher has been very open about, they're a small shop, Arl now, for Arlington, Virginia, and he said this doesn't work for original reporting. Don't bother. What he does, and it's labeled, he uses it to just generate a news summary at the end of the day. The really automated stuff that probably the human reporters are like, do I have to do this again? And so that's a job that he finds. It fits because it's summarizing stuff that's already out there.
Right. I mean, if you're an obituary writer,
Yeah, there's a craft to that first sentence, who was, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, the only ones I've submitted I wrote myself, but I mean, I think things like that where there's finite information or known information, right?
So you were talking before about tests that are not going to work anymore. What tests do work? If people want to sort of figure out, did a machine generate this? What are the tells?
Yeah. So I think any answer that we give today, and I could give a bunch of answers. Everybody's read about, using bursiness, using perplexity, which are all of which are like 30, 35-year-old techniques. That's so easily gamed if we want to. And so I think we need to take a step back and look at what is the big picture. The big picture is everybody's on this hype bandwagon about generative AI right now. But what we need to think about is the other side that nobody's talking about for some reason, which is interpretive AI, right? The way you detect generated stuff is by having a better interpreter, right? If you have an AI that's doing interpretation of the language, and if it's doing deep interpretation, that's how you sense what is the quality of the ideas that are being generated. And that's how, we as humans, that's how an AI has to be able to judge, was this just like words strung together that kind of seemed on the surface of it convincing because it's fluent, et cetera, and full of cliches? Or does it have, deep ideas that are framed that are more unique? Right, and in natural language interpretation and understanding, which is something that we've been working on, deepening for 30 years now, especially in translation and interpretation systems. You want to get to things like how are the semantics framed? What are the semantic frames? How are the metaphors chosen that are being used to frame the ideas? Right, and this is this level of stuff that the generative AIs, large language models, right now don't actually have a model of. They're not aware, they're not conscious of it. And so they end up spitting out stuff which is, sort of full of surfacey cliches. They're not deep metaphors on the whole, unless somebody has used that deep metaphor before in the training text, right? And so it's brute forcing it right now because, the largest language models are trained on about 10% of all the text on the internet. And so nobody's read that much, and it might pull out a metaphor that some writer sometime came up with that you've never seen before, and you think, oh, that's really original. No, it's not, right? And so if you build an interpretive AI on that scale, where the interpretive AI recognizes, oh, that was an idea, a metaphor that was spoken by so-and-so, right? That's how you actually end up being able to detect things. That's how you actually end up being able to go beyond what, the sort of surface games that we're playing now. So, even though this surface tech is super useful, it's not going to get to the stuff that you really want. It might get to, like, let's say that you're applying generative AI to try to game SEO. Ultimately, the SEO is going to want to have a very strong interpretive AI and say, okay, you got a lot of phrases that kind of match the domain of the query, but did you get the deep idea in the query? And do the deep ideas in the page beyond, sort of surfacey phrases actually make sense for the query, right? And that's going to need deep interpretive AI.
Well, I know it's not AI if it's grammatically and syntactically incorrect and there's misspellings and there's lazy punctuation, right? So we look at a lot of LinkedIn profiles, just the nature of our job, right? We got to recruit developers for our marketplace. And more engineers are using ChatGPT to, like, hey, ChatGPT, summarize my experience and optimize it for recruiters. But the interesting ones we see aren't, like, we just recruited a senior tech lead out of Boston, and his LinkedIn About section is, I like bananas, right? Like, clearly ChatGPT didn't write that, right? And he's such a good engineer, he doesn't really need LinkedIn for a job, right? He's got a network for that. So you read that and you're like, okay, our other profiles, they're like lazy punctuation, you're like, okay, obviously this is a human.
I'm not even on LinkedIn.
What?
Well, thank you for saving me from looking you up.
I did look you up. I'm like, what's going on?
I think where we are right now is in a transitional phase where people are kind of excited, they're on board, but I would liken it to, Homo habilis transitioning to Australopithecus afarensis. So you're going from power grip to precision grip. It's holding a hammer versus holding a pen, right? So it's kind of become a blunt tool that we see and we want to apply it and we're all excited about it. But then there's that faction that's scared of it that takes it right to Skynet. And I never fault someone for being scared of what they don't understand, but I think people like us, technologists, the duty is on us to help others explain and embrace it, because this is something that is going to make our lives better, more rich, more interesting. It's going to innovate. People were afraid of photographs. The invention of the photograph changed news. It changed art. It changed so many things. It's a pivotal moment. And so I think if you're anything but happy about it, then you just don't understand it. So it's on the individual to get excited.
Photography is a good example because there are all these sort of traditions and expectations, like you're allowed to do this kind of filtering. You can do an automatic filter in Google Photos, that's okay. But traditionally, you're not supposed to remove things from the photo. Of course, no, Google wants us to do that. That's a sales pitch in a Super Bowl ad. How should the use of AI writing be? Do you put ChatGPT on the byline with you? What's a good labeling practice to follow here?
So the question here, there's kind of two versions of this question. One is, what would be good for the quality of the material, right? And the answer to that question is use whatever, right? If to the extent a large language model actually helps improve the content, that's great. It helps humanity. But then there's the other half of the question, which I think is important not to mix up into that, which is sort of what happens to intellectual property and copyright and all that kind of stuff. And that is actually a topic that I think is long over. It's one of the topics I've been trying to get into international conversation. The metaphor of intellectual outputs as property is, A, centuries old, B, sort of unique to one corner of the world historically, and the rest of the world found it a really weird alien concept. Sort of like, how can you own the air? It was useful because we were shoehorning economics, incentives for creators into a system that had evolved based on physical manufacture, and so we limped along with it for a while. Entered the 21st century AI era. That metaphor is way, way long in the tooth. That metaphor needs to go away. In the same way that inventing that metaphor in the first place revolutionized economics and society and catalyzed progress, the advent of AI is nothing like we have ever seen. Nothing the planet has ever seen. Some people say it's the fourth industrial revolution. No, it's not. That it's comforting to hear that, because it implies somehow like, oh, well, we handled the first three, we know how to do that. But that was about automating muscle. When we automate ideas and opinion and influence, everything changes. This is not the fourth of anything. This is the first. And along with a revolution of that scale, it is imperative for us to do the same kind of radical thinking that led to the idea that you could make intellectual output something that was a scarcity, something that was ownable, controllable. We need to actually think in an AI era now. We've been remixing ideas throughout human history. And now we've entered a time when AIs are helping us to remix those ideas. Where does the credit go? Where does the incentive go? Well, look, AI scale problems can only be tackled using AI itself. We need to take AI and we need to use AI to look at what is the provenance of ideas. Where do ideas come from? Who did you mix into this output? And then automatically distribute some of the financial rewards back to those creators at AI scale, which is now possible.
That's a subject for another panel. I'd like to know more later on. I'll have you know, I have my notes on paper, but did they originally come from ChatGPT? You'll never know. Thank you, everybody. We're now moving on to the next panel.
Thank you.